All right, Shalom, Shalom. It's Brother Yatazadak, Hero of Israel. Before I get started, I'd like to give honor and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakat Padash, double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Today we're going to go into Isaiah chapter 2, going into the Hebrew. So, Lord willing, you're edified, giving all honor and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakat Padash, double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Right? So, let's see if we can get a prologue on this chapter. Isaiah chapter 2. Prologue. Shalom to the 144,000 of the nation of Israel, which consists of you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. Shalom to the hopeful elect, right? Starting with the 144,000, a great multitude that will be delivered out of America, Babylon the Great, from the incoming destruction after the RFID chip is implemented, which is a mark of the beast, and which is a focal point of the latter day prophecies. Revelation 13 to 16, he calls it both small and great, rich and poor, to receive a mark in the right hand or in the forehead. But first, you got to have things like martial law, FEMA camps, right? World economic collapse, right? But anyways, let's look at the, this is from the Blue Letter Bible, David Guzik, study guide for Isaiah chapter 2, which says, hope and fear, the hope of the Messiah's reign, which his name is Yahweh Shai Hamashayak. Most High God's name is Yahweh. Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. Ba'ashem means in the name in the ancient Hebrew tongue. Yahweh Shai Hamashayak is who you call Jesus Christ. It's not Jehovah, not Yahuwah. It is Yahweh. Ba'ashem Hamashayak Yahweh Shai. Ba'ashem Rakak Kwadash, which is the Holy Spirit, which is the understanding that has been given to the remnant of the nation of Israel to prophesy in these latter days, expound on the biblical word, the prophetic word, to the remnant of the nation of Israel, pursuant to Isaiah chapter 10, right? So it says, the word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So it says, this prophecy, continuing on through Isaiah 4, is directed towards the southern kingdom, Judah and its capital, Jerusalem. It says, since Isaiah and Micah were contemporary prophets, it is surprising that the same spirit of the Lord could give these two prophets the same vision to establish and emphasize his word. Talking about the kingdom of heaven. So this is an exaltation to Judah and Jerusalem, which is why it says here in the latter days, right? It also touches on the peaceful nature of the Messiah's reign, right? Because the book of Nahum says what? Behold the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, right? We're just talking about Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, but we are walking in that same spirit, right? Which is, that's talking about Yahweh Shai, but it's talking about the remnant as well. We're prophesying on the highways and byways, starting with the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, right? Pursuant to Matthew 22 and 9, to get our people to the marriage, right? These so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans, as well as the confusion of face, which look like other nations, but they are of the same bloodline of our same genus, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the children of the prophets. Right, so that's talking about the remnant, also known as the Tower of the Flock, etc., etc. Something I was meditating on the other day, right? Anyways, let's get right into it. The Spirit of the Lord, Lord willing, you're edified. Allah, which is what these other cams, that's all you hear them say. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but you know, it just seems like you hear it more than necessary, right? So this is Isaiah 2:1. Says the word which was envisioned unto Isaiah the son of Amos, or which is a vision of Isaiah the son of Amos concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which reads Hadabar Ashar Hazah Isha Yahweh Ban Amatazah Al Yahweh Wa Yerushalayim. Verse 2 reads, And it will come to pass in the latter days shall be established it will be the mount of the house of the Lord upon the summit of the mountains. It says, and will be lifted up above the hills, and will flow unto it, all nations. Because that word Nahar, I believe it means river. Let's take a look at that word. Which is here used to mean to flow, right? To flow together, however you want to put it. The word is Nahar, Strong's H 5102. Says to stream, to flow, stream. Nahar, a river, right? Which reads Wahaya ba Ahoryath Hayamayim Nakawan Yahaya Har Bayath Yahweh Baraash Haharyam Wa Nasha'a Ma Gabayath Wa Naharwa Al Yawa Kal Hagawayim. just talking about the nations, right? So these other nations, their governments, that's what it means, mountains, right? The hills are these, they're districts or whatever you want to, however you want to put it, right? Or they're smaller countries, right? Which is going to be established when Yahweh Shai Hamashiach returns and reigns with the elect, right? So the elect are going to prophesy until the the Karagma is established. Then they will be delivered via the chariots of the Most High God, which are the so-called UFOs, UAPs, right? Which is actually the vehicles of the holy angels. The elect being delivered, beamed up, like Paul the Apostle said, changed in the blink of an eye, then set back into their own land, given immortality, basically, right? And fighting alongside Yahweh Shai and the holy angels against the armies in the Valley of Decision, which is not really going to be a fight. I mean, Yahweh Shai is just going to disintegrate them, the armies of the earth, right? But anyways, verse 3 says, and will go peoples many, and will say, go, let us ascend up, or come, let us ascend up. Come and we will ascend up unto the mount of the Lord, unto the house of the God of Jacob. Um, and he will teach us of his ways. Lock it. Let me get this thing out of the way. And we will walk in the manners, because that's what Iraq means, like a manner, custom, right? Manner of life. It also means a traveler. And we will walk in their manners, in their paths, because from Zion will go out the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, which reads, Wa halakwa amyam rabiam wa amarwa lakwa wa na ilah al har Yahweh al bayath alahaya yaikwab wa yara nawa madarak yawa wa na laka ba arach tayawa kaya ma tazayawan ta taza'a tawara wa dabar Yahweh ma Yerushalayim. Verse 4 says, and will judge between the nations, and will reprove peoples many, because that word nakach actually means to reprove. And they shall beat their swords to plowshares, and their spears onto pruning hooks. They will not lift up nation unto nation's sword, and will not learn any more war. Which reads, Washapat Bayan Hagwayim Waha Nakyach Waha Wahakyach La Imyam Rabiam Wakathathwa Harabtham La Athium Wachanyath Tayahum Lama Zamarath La'a Yasha'a Gawaya Al Gawaya Harab Wala'a Yalamadwa Iwad Malachama. The word kathath, it means to crush. Strong's H3807. To beat, to crush, by beating, to crush to pieces. Ath, that's the word for plowshare, right? I'm sure I looked it up before, but let's look up plowshare. So this is a plowshare. It's a plowing device. Which that word atha, it's akin to the word ba'a, meaning to enter, to come. So sometimes you'll read it as atha, sometimes you'll read it as ba'a, but essentially it means the same thing, right? The word for spear is kanyath, which actually means javelin. Zamar just means to prune, or mazamar, a pruning hook, or a pruning device. Verse 5 says, House of Jacob, go and let us walk in the light of the Lord, which is read as Bayath Yaikwab Lakwa Wana Laka Ba'awar Yahweh. It says, because thou hast forsaken your people, the house of Jacob, because they be filled from the east. It says here replenished, but that word mala'ah means to fill, or fulfilled, right? Because you had to have particular things come to pass, right? The siege of Jerusalem, the desolation, 70 AD, right? Jake fleeing to the interiors of West Africa and throughout the other parts of the earth, right? Then the transatlantic slave trade, right? which I've been meaning to go into that, right? So we're going to go into some history. It's a lot. Let's get that real quick. It's a lot. Just bear with me. All right. So this is from Wikipedia.com. So I looked up the Mayflower, which says Mayflower was an English sailing ship that transported a group of English families, known today as the Pilgrims, from England to the New World in 1620. After 10 weeks at sea, Mayflower, with 102 passengers and a crew of about 30, reached what is today the United States, dropping anchor near the tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts on November 21st, 1620. Right, because that's when the 3.5 years, which is 350 years, uh, from the time when Jake was downtrodden, was put into captivity in America, Babylon the Great, and then, like it says in Revelation chapter 11, 3.5 years till 1969, which is when the truth came out of 1 West, Harlem, New York, 125th Street, right? The labors were continued via our elders and apostles of Great Millstone, right? Salakia. So let's see. So it started, says, different from their contemporary Puritans who sought to reform and purify the Church of England, the Pilgrims chose to separate themselves from the Church of England, which forced them to pray in private. They believed it was beyond redemption due to his resistance to reform and Roman Catholic past. Right, so these were Edomites separated from other Edomites, right? So it says, starting in 1608, a group of English families left England for the Netherlands where they could worship freely. By 1620, the community determined to cross the Atlantic for America, which they considered a new promised land where they would establish Plymouth Colony. Right, so they went to the Netherlands, then they went from the Netherlands to America, right? Just to give you a little background on that, I want to go to this is from Wikipedia, Jamestown, Virginia. Says the Jamestown settlement in the colony of Virginia was the first permanent English settlement in the Americas. It was located in the northeast bank of James River, about 2.5 miles southwest of the center of modern Williamsburg. It was established by the Virginia Company of London as James Fort on May 4th, 1607, and was considered permanent after a brief abandonment in 1610. It followed several failed attempts, including the lost colony of Roanoke, established in 1585 on Roanoke Island, later part of North Carolina. says, despite the dispatch of more settlers and supplies, more than 80% of the colonists died in 1609, 1610, mostly from starvation and disease. In the mid 1610, the survivors abandoned Jamestown, though they returned after meeting a resupply convoy in the James River. So it says in August 1619, the first recorded slaves from Africa to British North America arrived in what is now Old Point Comfort near the Jamestown colony on a British privateer ship flying a Dutch flag. So this is when the first slaves arrived in America. It says that approximately 20 Africans from present-day Angola have been removed by the British crew from the Portuguese slave ship São João Bautista. Right, so during that time, you had the Portuguese taking Jake and taking them to South America, and so on and so forth. Right, so it wasn't just Southern Kingdom. Right, you got some Northern Kingdom in the Southern Kingdom. Right, but the majority were already here when they fled the Assyrian captivity. Right, just like you got some Hamites when they were brought to the Americas. Some Hamites were among Jake. Right. So it says, had been removed. They most likely worked in tobacco fields as slaves under a system of race-based indentured servitude. It says one of their number included Angela, who was purchased by William Pierce. The modern conception of slavery in the British colonies was formalized in 1640 and was fully entrenched in the colony of Virginia by 1660. Says it is known for its historical significance as a site of the first permanent English settlement in America. The town is home to several museums and historical sites, including the Jamestown Settlement, the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown, which showcased the rich history of the area. So you have Roanoke Colony. It's from Wikipedia.com. It says Roanoke Colony was founded by Governor Ralph Lane, 1585. Roanoke Island in present-day Dare County, North Carolina. Lane's colony was troubled by a lack of supplies and poor relations with some of the local American Indian tribes. A resupply mission by Sir Richard Grenville was delayed, so Lane abandoned the colony, returned to England with Sir Francis Drake in 1586. It says Grenville arrived 2 weeks later and also returned home, leaving behind a small detachment to protect Raleigh's claim. So the second expedition, led by John White, landed on the same island in 1587 and set up another settlement. Sir Walter Raleigh had sent him to establish the city of Raleigh in Chesapeake Bay. That attempt became known as a lost colony due to the unexplained disappearance of the population. Right, so this was Esau attempting to colonize the western part of the world, which is attempts had failed initially, and the Lord put in the mind of the Gadites, right, and these other tribes that were there, right, to I guess they offed them or whatever. Slovakia. So this is from Wikipedia.com. Which says this is Old Point Comfort. Actually, there's nothing really to go over on that one. So this is from Wikipedia.com. I looked up the White Lion. It says the White Lion was an English privateer operating under a Dutch letter of marque, which brought the first Africans to the English colony of Virginia in 1619, a year before the arrival of the Mayflower in New England. Though the Africans captives were sold as indentured servants, the event is regarded as the start of African slavery in the colonial history of the United States. So it says the Africans on the White Line were probably among the thousands who had been captured in 1618, 1619 by slave raiding force, primarily consisting of African raiders under nominal Portuguese leadership, were at war with the Kingdom of Ndongo. These particular enslaved Africans were taken on the Portuguese slave ship João Bautista from Luanda, Angola, capital of the Portuguese settlements in Angola. The White Lion, along with another privateer, the Treasurer, commanded by Daniel L. Freeth, intercepted the Sao Bautista on its way to modern-day Veracruz, on the Gulf Coast of New Spain, present-day Mexico. Right, for you black-only Hebrew Israelites, or you Spanish-only Hebrew Israelites, which is ridiculous because I heard of them, but I haven't seen any videos about their teachings. And you Yah only. I've never seen a Yah only camp out there teaching. Or Yahuwah, the Yahuwah, right? So it says the two ships captured and divided part of the Portuguese ships, African captives, under the aegis of Dutch letters of marque from Maurice, Prince of George. White Lion Captain John Coylan Job sailed for the Virginia colony to sell the African captives, first landing in Point Comfort, modern-day Hampton Roads. So it says that John Rolfe, Secretary of the Colony of Virginia, wrote to Virginia Company in London, Treasurer Edwin Sandys, about the latter end of August, a Dutch man of war, of the burden of 160 tuns arrived Point Comfort. The commanders named Cape Jope. His pilot for the West Indies, one Mr. Marmaduke, an Englishman. They met with the treasurer in the West Indies and determined to hold concert ship hitherward, but in their passage lost one the other. He brought not anything but 20 and odd negroes, which the governor and Cape merchant bought for victuals, whereof he was great need, as he pretended, at the best and easiest rates that they could. So it says, after being sold off, the White Lion, two of the indentured servants, Isabella and Anthony, married and had a child in 1624. William Tucker, named after a Virginia planter, was the first recorded person of African ancestry born in English America. Right, so this was another instance when Jake is brought to the Americas, sold off, and then let's see. So this is from time.com. It says the first Africans in Virginia landed in 1619. It was a turning point for slavery in American history, but not the beginning. It says it was 400 years ago, about the latter end of August, that an English privateer ship reached Point Comfort on the Virginia Peninsula. Their governor, George Yearly, and his head of trade, Cape merchant Abraham Pearsley, brought the 20 and odd Negroes aboard in exchange for victuals, meaning they traded food for slaves. Such a trade was described 5 months after the fact in a letter to the Virginia Company of London, had never before occurred in English North America, making this an ignominious milestone and one that 400 years later is still surrounded by misconceptions and debate. At the very least, 1619 represented a landmark in the long history of slavery in European colonies and the beginning stages of what would become the institution of slavery in America. Yada, yada, yada. This is from historicjamestown.com. Historicjamestown.com. The header reads, the first Africans arrived in Virginia because of the transatlantic slave trade. Across the 3.5 centuries, from 1501 to 1867, more than 12 1.5 million Africans were captured, sold, and transported to the Americas, while Portugal and Spain were the first European powers engaged in this trade. Eventually, most of the European powers would get involved. It was profitable as it was brutal. It says the Africans who came to Virginia in 1619 had been taken from Angola in Central West Africa. They were captured in a series of wars that was part of a much broader Portuguese hostilities against the Congo and Ndongo kingdoms in other states. These captives were then forced to march 100 to 200 miles to the coast to the major slave trade port of Luanda, right? They were put on board the San Juan Bautista, which carried 350 captives bound for Veracruz on the coast of Mexico in the summer of 1619. Nearing her destination, the slave ship was attacked by two English privateers, the White Lion and the Treasurer in the Gulf of Mexico, and robbed of 50 to 60 Africans. Two privateers then sailed to Virginia, where the White Lion arrived at Point Comfort, Slovakia, or present-day Hampton, Virginia, toward the end of August. John Rolfe, a prominent planter and merchant, and formerly the husband of Pocahontas, reported that 20 and odd Negroes were bought for victuals. Italics added, the majority of the Angolans were acquired by wealthy and well-connected English planters, including Governor Sir George Yeardley and the Cape or head merchant Abraham Pearsley. The Africans were sold into bondage despite Virginia having no clear-cut laws sanctioning slavery. It says the treasurer arrived at a Point Comfort a few days after the White Lion, but did not stay long, quickly setting sail for English colony of Bermuda. Prior to leaving port, however, it was possible that 7 to 9 Africans were sold, including a woman named Angela, who was taken to Captain William Pierce's Jamestown property. By March 1620, 32 Africans were recorded in a muster as living in Virginia, but by 1625, 23 were recorded. These Africans, scattered throughout homes and farms in the James River Valley, were the first of hundreds of thousands of Africans forced to endure slavery in colonial English America. So this is from Google.com. When were slaves from Africa brought in masses to America? It says throughout 17th and 18th century, people were kidnapped from the continent of Africa, forced into slavery in the American colonies, and exploited to work. This is from EGI.org, the transatlantic slave trade. And I'll go ahead and put the link for all these so you can check it out yourself. It says American port cities from New England to New Orleans were shaped by the transatlantic slave trade. Between 1501 and 1867, nearly 13 million African people were kidnapped, forced into European and American ships, and trafficked across the Atlantic Ocean to be enslaved, abused, and forever separated from their homes, families, and cultures. Yada, yada, yada. It says 2 million people died during the barbaric Middle Passage. Nearly 13 million African people were kidnapped and trafficked across the Atlantic to the Americas, including the British, French, and Spanish colonies that would later comprise the United States. African countries were destabilized and left vulnerable to conquest, colonization, and violence for centuries. In the Americas, a caste system based on race and color emerged in tandem with legal and political systems to codify white supremacy and enshrine enslavement as a permanent and hereditary status. Kidnapping, trafficking, abusing, and dehumanizing African people and their descendants was a lucrative for Europeans and white Americans, as it was traumatizing for black people. Says the transatlantic slave trade enriched many white people across occupations and industries, from early European colonists to priests and popes, shipbuilders to rum, textile producers, bankers to insurers, and generated the capital used to build some of America's greatest cities and most successful companies. Yada, yada, yada. Let's see what else we got. Says this is from Wikipedia.com, Atlantic slave trade. The Portuguese in the 16th century were the first to buy slaves from West African slavers and transport them across the Atlantic. In 1526, they completed the first transatlantic slave voyage to Brazil, and other Europeans soon followed. Ship owners regarded the slaves as cargo to be transported to the Americas as quickly and cheaply as possible. Says the first enslaved Africans were sent to English colonies were classified as indentured servants with legal standing similar to that of a contract based. The first enslaved Africans sent to the English colonies were classified as indentured servants with legal standing similar to that of contract based workers coming from Britain and Ireland. However, by the middle of the 17th century, slavery had hardened as a racial caste, with African slaves and future offspring being legally the property of their owners, as children born to slave mothers were also slaves. Says the major Atlantic slave trading nations in order of trade volume were Portugal, Britain, Spain, France, Netherlands, United States, Denmark. Several had established outposts in the African coast where they purchased slaves from local African leaders. So that's why the Lord said, "What have you to do with me, Tyre and Zidon?" Because that's talking about the Hamites selling Jake, Esau selling Jake, Ishmael selling Jake. Because you have the sub-Saharan slave trade, and you had Jake selling Jake, right? Says near the beginning of the 19th century, various governments acted to ban the trade, although illegal smuggling still occurred. It was generally thought that the transatlantic slave trade ended in 1867, but evidence was later found of voyages until 1873. In the early 21st century, several governments issued apologies for the transatlantic slave trade. Damn, I'm looking for a different article which showed how Ham traded Jake for commodities. Shit. Salakia, just bear with me. Oh, here it is. So this is from time.com. It says, in addition, indigenous people, notably those of 30-odd tribal communities led by Pocahontas' father, Powhatan, lived in the area that became Virginia long before Europeans or Africans got there. The English settlers enslaved indigenous people around the time of 1619. Some colonists later owned both American Indian and African slaves. Right? So that's Northern, Southern Kingdom. Nope, that wasn't what I was looking for. Damn. Oh, here it is. So this is from Wikipedia.com, Atlantic slave trade. And I'm scrolling down to African slavery. It says slavery was prevalent in many parts of Africa for many centuries before the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. Millions of enslaved people from some parts of Africa were exported to the States and Africa, Europe, and Asia prior to the European colonization of the Americas. So it reads, the African continent was bled of its human resources via all possible routes across the Sahara through the Red Sea, from the Indian Ocean ports and across the Atlantic. The trans-Saharan slave trade across the Sahara had functioned since antiquity and continued to do so up to the 20th century. It says at least 10 centuries of slavery for the benefit of the Muslim countries from 9th to 19th, 4 million enslaved people exported via the Red Sea, another 4 million through the Swahili ports of the Indian Ocean, perhaps as many as 9 million across the Trans-Saharan caravan route, 11 to 20 million, depending on the author, across the Atlantic Ocean. So here's a point. According to John K. Thornton, Europeans usually both bought enslaved people who were captured in endemic warfare between African states. Some Africans have made a business out of capturing Africans from neighboring ethnic groups, war captives, and selling them. A reminder of this practice is documented in the slave trade debates of England and in the early 19th century. It says people living around the Niger River were transported from these markets to the coast and sold at European trading ports in exchange for muskets and manufactured goods such as cloth or alcohol. However, the European demand for slaves provided a large new market for the already existing trade, right? Because you had Ishmael since antiquities, like it says, since the 9th century, right? Selling Jake and ham. So, like I said, I'll put these links in the description box. So that's why it says, therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east, right? Because you had particular things that had to be fulfilled concerning prophecy, right? And it says, and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. Because that's what basically happened, and it's still happening today, right? Jake and Ham, Jake took on the customs of Ham, which the Lord said explicitly in the book of Exodus not to take on their customs, right? So this is why you got the Levites doing voodoo in Haiti, right? You got the Dominicans, which are the Simeonites, on into Santeria and all kinds of nonsense. South America, you got the Dia de la Muerte. You got Jake still in Africa, which is the land of Ham, right? Cutting their marks, cutting their face, and doing all kinds of madness, right? So they were replenished from the east, right? Meaning the Lord cast Jake off, but he still kept them, right? They mingled amongst the Hamites, right? Then the Hamites, well, they already knew that who Jake is. They know who Jake is because they look different, right? So they sold them to Esau, right? Ishmael was selling Ham and Jake, and then this is how, right? Jake was brought to the Americas, right? So you see, we go into the history, the history, historical accounts, the precepts, right? And I'm gonna bring out an interesting point I was recently researching. Slovakia. Just bear with me. Let's see where we're at as far as how long the video's been playing, or how long I've been recording. All right, we're 1 hour in. Now let's go to Twitter. And that's interesting. That's what happens when you meditate in the Word. You constantly, right? You feed by Yahweh Shai supping with you. Let's look at the head of the post first, which I'm not sure why it's not letting me go to that. This is from African Hub, which says during the slave trade, blacks, African slaves were subjected to castration.
To sex slaves. The male captives were, on the other hand, pitilessly castrated to prevent them from reproducing and becoming a stock. Castration of became a habit among slave traders due to the fact that they were in higher demand, stronger, noted to work faster and more efficiently, and were not a threat to slave masters and owners who feared that their wives, concubines, and female slaves would have affairs with them. The suffering inflicted on the victims of castration was profound, encompassing physical and psychological trauma. Castration was done to boys between the ages of 9 and 12, as it was believed that they survived the process more than an adult or adolescent. Although very many did not survive the process, as they often died during or after the harrowing operation. Whites died more, so slavers concentrated more on blacks. This was the darkest chapter in history that highlights the extent to which humans were dehumanized and exploited for gain. Here's a more detailed insight into this practice. 1. Economic factors. One of the primary reasons for castrating male captives was economic. The exporting countries had good economic incentives to castrate male slaves before they were shipped off. In the medieval slaving industry that was designed for exporting Slavic prisoners of war to the Arab world, castrating the slaves was an integral part of the process. Castration was then performed in the famous castration houses in Venice. Eunuchs, or castrated male slaves, were highly sought after due to their perceived trustworthiness and reliability. Eunuchs were considered valuable commodities in Arab societies, thus fetching much higher prices in slave markets compared to non-castrated slaves. Their lack of reproductive capability meant that they could serve in positions of trust and authority without posing a threat to the owner's hereditary wealth and power. Eunuchs were often employed in sensitive positions such as harem guards, administrative posts, and as servants in elite households. They served in influential positions in the Abbasid Caliphate's administration, with some even rising to the rank of vizier. The economic incentives gained by slave traders from exporting black eunuchs to the Arab nations encouraged the practice of castration. In some cases, such as the Zanj rebellion in the 9th century Iraq.
Right, so this is why it's profitable for, right, Jake and Ham to, right, be in Islam and all kinds of philosophies, right? This is why they put Jake and Ham, right, together, right? The ghettos and right, yeah, you have some Jakes that are doing good, you have some Hamites doing good, right? But as a whole, this is what benefits Esau, right? Keeps Jake occupied, right? Promotes mixing with these Hamite tribes, right? To keep right the right the melanated races, right, in confusion, right? And this is not a new practice. Like I said, this says here, done during the Arab slave trade since the 9th century, right? So who benefits? Esau, Ishmael, Ham to an extent, right? But mostly, right? They're messed up, right? Uh, so let's keep on watching.
Castrated slaves were sought after to work in dangerous and demanding environments like salt mines. This practice had persisted for centuries in the Arab slave trade. As late as 1903, there were still 194 African eunuchs in service to the Ottoman ruling family. 2. Control and domination. Castration was employed by Arab slavers as a means of exerting control and dominance over their male captives. By removing their ability to procreate, the slavers aimed to eliminate any potential threats of rebellion or the establishment of rival lineages. Additionally, castration was intended to ensure that these slaves would remain solely devoted to their master's demands without the distractions of family or personal attachments. 3. Social dislocation. Enslaved males who were castrated were forcibly removed from their communities and families. This social dislocation had far-reaching consequences as it disrupted the social fabric of African societies and led to imbalanced gender ratios. In regions where castration was prevalent, such as East Africa and the Sudan, entire villages were affected as young men were captured and subjected to this brutal practice. Many eunuchs who served in the harem of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul remained in servitude for life, isolated from their African roots. Their roles as loyal servants or guards sometimes meant they were isolated from their own cultural backgrounds and communities for life. Young boys were captured and castrated so that when they grew up, they could serve as eunuchs in harems. This slave ship was photographed in 1896. This large group of young boys may have been destined for castration to serve as eunuchs. The slaves in the photograph were headed to a Muslim country well after the American Civil War. In fact, slavery in the United States was a good bit more humane than slavery in the Arab world. It was bloody for Africans, bloody beyond words. In some cases, African societies would engage in castration as a preemptive measure to protect their youth from being captured and castrated by Arab slave traders. This reflects the deep fear and trauma associated with this practice.
Right. So you have Ham castrating Ishmael, Ishmael castrating Ham. Right. It's madness.
4. Psychological and physical trauma. Castration was itself a traumatic experience, both physically and psychologically, for those subjected to it. The surgery itself was often performed without anesthesia under crude and unhygienic conditions, leading to excruciating pain and a high risk of infection. Many African boys did not survive their castration surgery. 6 out of every 10 people who were mutilated died from their wounds in castration centers. This is a prime reason why there are not many communities of blacks living in the non-African Muslim world today, despite the millions of black African slaves who were sold into the Muslim world. Castration led to hormonal imbalances on survivors, affecting the physical development and health of victims. Without testosterone, eunuchs often suffered from various health issues such as decreased muscle mass, fatigue, obesity, osteoporosis, and a lack of secondary sexual characteristics. 5. Cultural and religious beliefs. Some societies believed that castrated individuals were spiritually purer and more suitable for certain religious duties. For instance, in some Islamic societies, eunuchs were considered more appropriate for guarding holy sites. The guardianship of the Holy Kaaba in Mecca included the use of African eunuchs. Some men were castrated to be eunuchs in domestic service, and the practice of neutering male slaves was not limited to only black males. The Khalifa in Baghdad at the beginning of the 10th century had 7,000 black eunuchs and 4,000 white eunuchs in his palace, writes author Ronald Siegel in his 2002 book Islam's Black Slaves, The Other Black Diaspora. In the Arab world, demand for castrated slaves was so high that even with the appalling death rate from the procedure, it was still profitable, which explains why there is no large African diaspora community in Arab countries. Castrated men don't father children. The Arab slave trade had a tragic impact on the evolution of African societies. Some areas were completely devastated and depopulated. Welsh explorer Henry Morton Stanley, from 1841 to 1904, was a horrified witness of this traffic. He wrote that after the depredations of the Arab traffickers, the black blood flows toward the north, the equator smells corpses. As one commentator puts it, could it be true that the corrosive effects of 4 centuries of commerce in humans, with its temptation, its inbuilt opportunism, its reduction of humans to a cash value, its cycles of revenge, and its inevitable physical brutality have built lasting flaws into the African pattern of thought and action. The United Nations has made March 23 the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and UNESCO has made August 23 the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. When will there be an international day to commemorate the victims of the Arab-Muslim slave trade? When will an international research program address this subject? When will a project be implemented to identify, restore, and publicize the sites and monuments linked to this Arab trade, like the existing projects concerning the transatlantic trade? When will educational material be produced and cultural and art?
Right? Which is why you got that Free Palestine thing going on over there, right? When you goddamn you filthy Arabs, you did a lot of iniquity too, not just Ham, right? So you got this from Yaquam, says free Palestine, lock them up. They want to free Palestine, lock them up. So that goes into what? The desolation of Jake being sold off, right? The Romans sacking the temple, right? Uh, says Roman Emperor Hadrian, Jews were expelled from the area surrounding Jerusalem. Roman Emperor Hadrian, determined to root out Jewish nationalism, changed the name of the province from Judea to Syria Palestina, which is a comment I put on there. In 135 CE, after stamping out the province of Judea's second insurrection, the Romans renamed the province Syria Palestina, that is, Palestinian Syria. They did so resentfully as a punishment to obliterate the link between the Jews. Right? So let's go back to the blue letter. It says, because thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be filled from the east, and soothsayers, as in they are soothsayers, like the Philistines, and in children of strangers, they delight themselves. Let's look at that word, tash. Strong's H 5203 says to leave, to forsake, to abandon. So basically, means to leave off. Another way to say abandon. Ainan, soothsayer, right, which is another word for Ainan. It means cloud, but also means a covering or an augur. Or your modern day augur would be like weather forecaster, right? Because that's going into looking into the heavens for signs and patterns and observing omens, which is basically like a pattern, right? Which you read about that in scripture, right? For example, you in the book of Exodus, Joseph said that he observed through divination he needed that cup that he put in the sack of his brothers. He said, I use that to observe, uh, to divine. But the word divine is not always tied to left hand practices, right? To divine, right, is just to, I believe Laban did the same with not Laban, Bethuel. He did the same with Isaac, right? Or not with Isaac. Laban. It was Laban, yeah, with Jacob. He says, "I observed that the Lord bless you." That word is nakash, meaning an omen, by omens, as in to observe by observation. Joseph said that he used that cup to divine, but he really wasn't using witchcraft. He was saying that, right, so they can wonder, okay, how does he know so much about us, so on and so forth, or to scare them, right? So the word Ainan, Soothsayer, let's look at it. Strong's H6049, to observe times, augury, right? It's basically an augur. Strong's H5606, Sapak, to clap, slap, chastise, just means to clap. Or to applaud. In this case, right, to please themselves, right? Just another way to say they please themselves and the children of strangers, right? That's all it's saying. It's not saying anything else or anything more, right? So it says Kaya Natashta I'm Ka Bayath Yaikwab Kaya Malaawa Ma Kwadam Wa Ainanium Ka Palashtayam Waba Yaladya Nakarium Ya Shapiakwa. See how many more verses we got left. Probably have to do a part two. So with that, it's Brother Yatazda Kira Israel. And as always, Lord willing, you were edified. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do part two, Lord willing, soon. And as always, giving all honor and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Kakwadash. Double honors to the elders and apostles, Great Millstone, Kwame Sha'ala, Abad Babal, Shalom. What was that smell? Ugh. Salaki, I thought I ended the. Shalom.